right, boys. We have week 7 power rankings here, and because we were missing the video for week 6, I'm going to touch base on the last 2 weeks in this one. So starting with number 12, dropping one spot from last week is now Jeremy. He's 1 in 5, 11th in points for, and 10th in points against at this moment. He narrowly picked up his first win of the season in week 5, but he was still only 8th in scoring that week. And then in week 6, he was 11th in scoring and lost again. He's also now traded who I'd consider to be his best player in Kenneth Walker, so that's really concerning. And so, with all that combined, I think this now looks like the worst team in the league. Moving on to 11, also dropping one spot is Pat, also 1 in 5. He's sitting at 9th in points scored and 4th in points against. He keeps struggling, and his losing streak is now at 5. He did start the season winning. He's had a pretty difficult schedule to this point. However, he's definitely not helping himself, sitting in the bottom half of the league in scoring, so it's hard to use his schedule as an excuse. And yeah, week 6 I think was a new low, losing to who I thought was clearly the worst team in the league up until that week. And speaking of that man, sitting at number 10 is Garrett, who's raised 2 spots from last week. Garrett's sitting at 2 and 4 now after his win over Pat. He's 12th in points scored, 7th in points against. And I'll be honest, I never thought Garrett was going to move from the 12th spot all season. I thought he was just going to sit there. But I think Jay's latest trade definitely makes him worse. And I couldn't justify keeping Garrett below Pat after last week. And so for that, I think it was one of the ugliest games of the season that Garrett came out on top of. And I moved him up 2 spots for it because I think Jay and Pat both deserve to fall below him. Sitting at 9th is going to be Lark. This is where he was last week. This is another 1 in 5 team. He's 7th for points for and 2nd for points against. So pretty brutal schedule for Lark, getting 2nd in points against, sitting there. He's still in the bottom half of the league of scoring as well, but I definitely think he's better than his 1 in 5 record. I don't think he's much better, but he's definitely better than 1 in 5. He was 7th in scoring in both of the last 2 weeks and came out 0 and 2. So he's definitely better than everyone below him in my mind, even if some of them have a better record. And honestly, I think this might even be a better team than a couple of these guys above him. But again, with a 1 in 5 record, I can't justify putting Lark any higher than this. Coming in at 8th, dropping 2 spots, is Kurt. Kurt sits at 3 and 3. He's 10th in points for and 1st in points against. This is one of the most inconsistent teams I think I've ever seen in our league. He flies up and down these rankings unlike anything I've seen. In order, week 1 to week 6, he's ranked in points 5th, 2nd, last, 8th, 3rd, last. He's faced the hardest schedule in the league, but it's hard to give him that benefit when he's sitting 10th in scoring, kind of similar to some of these other guys. It's hard to look at them and say, oh, you have a tough schedule, that's why you've lost, when you've also just been really bad at scoring points yourself. Coming in at 7th is going to be John, actually going up 1. He sits at 3 and 3. He's 8th in points scored and 8th in points against. And this team's been pretty bad so far, but his schedule has been equally as easy, and that leaves him with an even record sitting outside the playoffs. He did manage to pick up a week 6 win, while Steve lost, and that inches him a little bit closer to the playoff picture, but he's still down a whole game and roughly 60 points from that playoff picture. So I don't feel great about this team right now. I don't even know that I really think this team deserves to be 3 and 3, but it's where they're sitting, and John's going to stay at 7 for now. Going to number 6 is going to be Mitch, going up 1 spot. He's also 3 and 3. He's 6th in points for, 5th in points against. This team has been one of the biggest surprises of the season, despite the 2-game losing streak. He was 6th in scoring in week 5 and caught Kurt on one of his random hot weeks. Week 6, he was 4th in scoring and had to match up with one of the best teams in the league. So you look at that; those are 2 games where you're in the almost top half of scoring, and a 6th is kind of right there on the edge. But again, playing against Kurt, like I said, with the inconsistency, most weeks 6th in scoring would have been enough to beat Kurt. And then, facing Nick's always tough. Right now, Mitch is sitting in the third playoff spot in the Knuckles division. And I'd say with Kurt, Garrett, and Lark being the people sitting below him, I think he's in a pretty good spot. I think he's got a good chance of holding on to that. He's going to see Kurt and Lark one more time each, and Garrett twice this season. So those games are going to be huge to determine whether or not Mitchell can actually turn his awful draft around and make the playoffs. Coming in at fifth is going to be Austin, staying where he was last week. He sits at 4-2. He's fifth in points for and 12th in points against. He picked up a really ugly win week 5 and then got got 2 beat up on the lowest scoring team in week 6. He may not have done it in impressive fashion, but he strung together back-to-back wins and does now sit at a comfortable 2 seed in his division. The 4-2 looks good. It's good to see he's second in his division, but it's very concerning to see how easy his schedule's been. Fifth on points for is, it's not terrible. But it is concerning. You do wonder if Austin's eventually going to start hitting some tougher teams and if he's going to be able to beat those teams. So moving on to number 4. Steve, staying where he was last week. He's also 4-2. He's 4th in points for and 9th in points against. Steve's kind of right where you want to be in fantasy. He scored a lot of points. He hasn't had a ton of points scored against him. He unfortunately did run into the freight train that is Rich, but I'm impressed with what he's done over the past 3 weeks, honestly. And so for that reason, Steve's staying in the top 4. Moving on to third now, we have Vinny, who's also in the same spot. This is another 4-2 team. Vinny's second in points for and 11th in points against. So he took a really heartbreaking loss in week 5. And then came back in week 6 and absolutely dominated Kurt. I think there's no doubt he's a legit contender right now. And similar to Steve, but in a more dramatic fashion, Vinny has scored a ton of points, and he's had barely any points scored against him. So moving on to number 2, again, staying in the same spot is going to be Nick. Nick's 5-1. He's 3rd in points for. He's 6th in points against. He picked up his 2nd straight win to hold the top spot in his division. After taking it over in week 5. And since his disastrous week 4 performance, he's completely bounced back and been top 3 in scoring both of the last 2 weeks. Now moving on to our number 1 power ranking. Once again, it is Rich, who's been here every week except for the one off week when Nick took it from him. And I'm going to talk about Rich a little bit more in depth than any of the other teams. Rich is 5-1. He's 1st in points for, and he's 3rd in points against. He has been an absolute menace this season. And for a moment, I was looking at Rich this season, and I was thinking back to last season, and I was thinking this, is very similar. And it made me, kind of worry. I'm like, I wonder if Rich is going to stumble at some point this season like he did last year. Because last season, Rich also did start 5-1. He went on to be 8-2 at one point in the season, at which point it fell apart because after his 8-2 start, Rich finished the year 9-5 and with a first-round playoff exit. Now let me explain why. After looking at it, this season is absolutely nothing like last season for Rich. Last season at this point, Rich had scored 1,190.33 points with a differential of 84.13. This season, he scored 1,392.18 with a point differential of 187. That's a whole game ahead of last season for his points scored, basically, and he's doubled his point differential. And the craziest part is that he's facing tougher competition this season than he was last. Last season, at this point, he had 1,115.21 points scored against him through those 6 weeks. This season, 1,205.18. So he's had a harder schedule this year and still managed to look that good and score a ton more points and have again, double point differential. Right now, we're still a few weeks away from where Rich's season fell apart last year, but I feel confident that that's not going to happen for the 2nd season in a row. Last season felt like an inconsistent team that got lucky when they needed to. This season feels like complete dominance from Rich. So I look forward to see how that continues going on. I'm looking forward for this upcoming week, boys. We got some good matchups in the league. I think we're hitting that point in the season where the guys that are down might have to accept the season's over, and we're gonna start seeing the playoff picture come together within the next 4 or 5 weeks. So I'm wishing you all luck moving forward, seeing who starts to throw in the towel and trade everything away, and who starts picking up more assets. Good luck, boys. I'll see you soon.